Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Happy Friday, everyone. This is Marty Kaiser with Greater Orlando Realty. This will be our latest podcast episode of Real Estate Tidbits. Hallelujah. Our weather is finally warmed up. At least it's hallelujah for me. Now I can feel a lot more comfortable and doing my running and walking outside and just enjoying the Florida weather. I'm not a big fan of waking up when it's 40 degrees and maybe only going up to the high 50s. But according to the weather projections, we're supposed to have nice weather for at least the next week. So everybody enjoy. As usual, we're going to cover multiple of topics today. One of the things I wanted to start off with, which is kind of a random thing, but I think it's something that'll prove interesting to people that own a home in Florida, is, as you probably know, Florida residents are eligible for the homestead exemption, assuming that they live in the home as their primary residence and file for the homestead exemption. And that homestead exemption saves you money on your taxes. The way that the homestead tax laws are worded basically, once you have the homestead exemption, your property taxes can only increase as long as you own the home and live in it 3% a year. So as you may recall, if you've owned a home for a while, property values went up historically at high levels in 2021 and 2022. But as long as you were still residing in your home, you only paid a 3% increase. So just to give you a reference for that, if your taxes, let's say, were $5,000, the 3% increase would limit your raise to $150 a year. So that's relatively insignificant, and you probably wouldn't think twice about it. The reason that I'm bringing this up today is I have some customers who were original homeowners. They owned a home in Hunters Creek. They purchased it in 2003, and they resided in it through close to the latter part of 2023. And then they relocated and hired myself and my company to do property management on it. And they've decided to put it on the market for sale this year. So their situation is as follows, to give you an idea of how this can impact a homeowner that chooses to change the property from a primary residence to an investment property. Their taxes for the 20-year period, 2003 to 2023, went up a maximum of 3% a year. So in this particular property's instance, it actually went up less than $100 a year, basically. So even if they got the 3% increase for 20 years, that would only be a $2,000 increase over the 20 years of ownership. And that's assuming that they went up the maximum level of 3% a year. When you convert a property to an investment property, you lose the homestead exemption. But previously, the change in taxes wasn't that dramatic because property appreciation most years in the Orlando area, it was relatively moderate. Obviously, we had the recession in the like in the 2008 to 2011 timeframe. But other than that timeframe, for a lot of the years, the residential values would increase somewhere between 3 and 5% a year. Then we had those record-breaking years in 2021 and 22. And according to how the county values properties, 2021, according to their metrics, the average home in Orange County had a 21% increase. And in 2022, they had about a 13 or 14% increase. So the way that they valued this particular property that I have and anybody else that would be in this situation is they reassessed the property with a non-homestead designation on it. But because the price increases, according to their metrics, were so high, record-breaking highs in 2021 and 22, their taxes went up from 2023 to 2024. They went up 250%. You're hearing correctly. They went up 250% with no advance warning from the county that that's how they compute things. So, for example, let's just say hypothetically, their taxes in 2023 were $3,000 a year, and they took it off homestead exemption starting in 2024. Well, now their taxes in 2024 and going forward are going to be $7,500. So that's an increase of $4,500 in 1 year, which if you do the math on a monthly basis, that's about $375 a month. So that is a very large increase and one that not everybody has budgeted for. So the point of me explaining this to people is if you're contemplating either renting out your house or possibly listing it for sale, that's one item that you want to give consideration to, because if you've owned your home for a significant amount of time, your taxes could go up hundreds of dollars a month. And if you decide to sell it, of course, you don't have to worry about that. So that's just one thing to consider. Now, you might think to yourself, well, I just won't tell the county that I've moved, and I'll basically illegally continue the homestead exemption. And that's hypothetically possible, but the reason I say hypothetically is you've got to maintain your mailing address at the property that you're claiming the homestead for, and then you've got to work out an arrangement with the tenant to give you the mail that they receive continuously, because if you forward the mail, then that's how the county tax assessor's office is notified that you no longer live in the property, and then they adjust your taxes accordingly. So I never condone illegal behavior, so that's why I'm telling you what's legal and illegal. But I'm sure there's some people that try to do the illegal way, but just be aware that the county finds out not because you're notifying them, but because your mail has been forwarded. So it's just something to consider. There's always variables in the real estate business, and you just never know from one year to the next what could impact a particular customer's situation or the property. Additional information has been publicized this week. The Federal Reserve just had their most recent meeting. And as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, from all indications, and my opinion as well, your interest rates are going to pretty much stay pretty flat, in my opinion, for probably the next 4 or 5 months. So people that were expecting significant interest rates decreases are not going to get them, at least not in the short term. But the good news is it'll probably, to some degree, limit how many houses go on the market. So again, I'll reiterate that even though you might be paying a higher interest rate right now, you're going to have less competition for homes, and it's going to give you a better value when you acquire the home. And then when interest rates do go down at some point where it's significant enough, you can always refinance your home. Some other things that have come to light which are indirectly going to impact real estate for some people, and it's also just a point of a lot of publicity now, and I guess for some people, a lot of concern. With the change in administration, the federal government is kind of in, for lack of a better term, disarray. They've notified thousands of federal employees that if they want to take advantage of certain reduction in force benefits, they have to basically resign their positions by February 8th, which is about another week. and then they would get 8 months of severance pay. If they choose not to do that, they're at risk of losing their jobs. Now, I don't know how many jobs would be lost, but they're talking about thousands of jobs. And I won't even get into the logic with this. I'll just say the following. Regardless of whether you think the government's bloated, whether you think government employees don't do the type of job that you would expect, if you think government employees are overpaid, whatever your thinking is, unfortunately, our country can't function without a certain amount of government employees. Everything that you're used to getting, even like when you buy a house, for example, one of the things that they do, the lender does, is they have to verify with the Internal Revenue Service that the tax information that you provided the lender is the same tax return that you filed with the Internal Revenue Service, to make sure that you're not basically doing some illegal activities with your taxes. And so if that department gets overloaded or understaffed, it can take much longer for that information to get verified, in which case it could delay your closing. And that has happened in the past in the country, but we've never had this mass potential of losing all these employees. Where the last time it really happened was during COVID, when a lot of people were shuttered due to health concerns and the pandemic and all that. So a lot of the government positions were on furlough for a period of time, et cetera. So if adequate planning wasn't done for that, it was a major deterrent in closing on time. But now that's just one example of things that could be much worse. But think about it, just getting passports, Social Security benefits, Medicare benefits, Medicaid benefits. All these things are run by government employees that are career employees. So it could have a crazy effect. There's already a lot of confusion and consternation. A lot of government employees that obviously depend on their job to maintain their lifestyle, pay their rent or homeowner mortgage, and just take care of their families. They don't really have a lot of security. And of course, the feeling or kind of what has been discussed is that these employees, in many cases, are not very good. The other change that they're talking about trying to make is to take them off career status and make them a political appointees. And that would just be horrible. Regardless of what your political affiliation is, if kind of basic workers or political employees, you would have complete chaos every time a new president comes in, because then the new president could change employees it would be up to them. And so then they'd be putting people into positions based on their politics, not their qualifications. And it would also create situations where people would never speak up because they'd be afraid of losing their jobs. It just would be horrendous. And this equates to me as, if this comes into fruition for our country, it's how dictators get into power, because they have control over every aspect of your life and they lose a lot of the checks and balances. And this is not my opinion. This is things that are being seriously discussed right now. So this is why people need to be informed and do research and read the facts and not get a lot of political spin. Another thing that comes into play for the average citizen, for example, is safety. And, now with, the Department of Health and Human Services, with Robert Kennedy Jr. having some extreme positions that he's basically lied about. And I don't say the word lie lightly, when he was questioned on these things during his confirmation hearings, he basically said he never said a bunch of these things. And they have him on tape. It's not a question of he said, she said, it's on tape. And it's clearly discussed. And this stuff was within the last 4 and 5 years, and it's been consistently discussed by this gentleman. This gentleman would represent the worst in government, somebody that's got extreme viewpoints that could affect our nation's health. Because the more that he tries to come up with false information about the negative components of vaccines, there's going to be a larger segment of people that don't get vaccinated, and we're going to have a lot more diseases. I mean, these vaccines have statistical evidence of their benefits. In fact, now they're starting to have a bunch of tuberculosis cases in Kansas. And they haven't given tuberculosis vaccines for a while now because we had eradicated the vaccine and didn't feel the need for it. But now, unfortunately, tuberculosis is back on a smaller scale, but that's going to spread. And unless the government reinstitutes vaccines for that, which, I don't know how quickly they could do that. That's just one quick example of something going on that has nothing to do with politics right now. It's just that it was a disease eradicated. Now we're starting to get cases. Really, the only vaccine that doesn't have long-term studies that you could argue about if you wanted to argue that you don't feel comfortable there's enough data was the COVID vaccine. But all the other vaccines that Robert Kennedy Jr. has talked about, measles and mumps, and a lot of the common diseases, polio and such, there's so many studies that have been going on, and that's why we've pretty much eradicated these diseases. And there's just irrefutable evidence. And Kennedy comes in and says, well, I have an open mind, but we need more information. What information? We've got information for decades. And it's clear how many people died from it before and how many people are not dying from it nowadays. But one concern is our vaccine ratio over the past 5 years has gone down from about 90% to about 80% because of all the misinformation that's spread by people that don't believe in vaccines, which is their prerogative, but they spread things that are just not true, just like there's a big amount of people saying that vaccines cause autism. Well, if they did, obviously we'd have to make major changes, but there is no studies that are reputable that shows any causation between these vaccines that are saving lives and autism. I myself am very nervous about the direction of the country. The latest tragedy that we had is the air tragedy in Reagan Airport yesterday, as you probably heard on the news, with the helicopter hitting the airplane. And nobody's placed exact blame as of yet, so I won't get into that. The only thing I'll get into is that the air traffic controllers have been understaffed for a while now, and that's more a question of a lot of air traffic controllers have retired, and it's a very high stress job. It's obviously a crucial job because more and more people are flying. And like in Reagan Airport, they had one person doing the job of 2 people during this tragedy last night. And then we have an advisory board that's supposed to advise on oversight, safety, and all that to do with the airline industry. I think it's the NTSB or something. I don't know all these acronyms. And one of the first things that was done when the president-elect took office, which has only been a week and a half now, is he eliminated that board. So he eliminated one of the major oversights, and that board is nonpartisan. That board is designed to minimize or eliminate airplane issues, and obviously we don't want to have tragedies. And, when people say the government has too much regulation, sure, maybe you can say that about certain, things about, the bureaucratic snafus and this, that, and the other. But when it comes to safety, that's something that should be non-negotiable and should be nonpartisan. And I know myself, if I had a relative or a friend or somebody that I knew that either was injured or lost their life due to a lack of staffing, due to government eliminating positions or reducing, I would be just aghast. And now, as you know, this norovirus is widespread now. Florida is one of the leading states in the country. I don't know what, if anything, could have been done about it, but, when we get these viruses, they spread quickly. And, myself, I have children and friends and such, and it's just a matter of time before we have the next pandemic, because that's just the way of the world nowadays. And if we don't have the proper oversights, and if we don't act decisively on them with rational thinkers, and if we don't have the ability to try to come up with vaccines, it could be just devastating. I know that the bird flu, everybody's carefully watching now. There hasn't been a ton of cases, but there has been human transmission. Before it was just bird transmission. So God forbid that this human transmission starts to increase. It's just a matter of time before that increases on a wider scale. And if the government doesn't have the proper oversight and people in charge to take action on that, that could be a very detrimental thing. I know I've kind of spent a lot on our healthcare system and some of the ramifications of political decisions, but these things that I'm mentioning should be nonpartisan. They're not Democratic issues. They're not Republican issues. They're health and safety issues. And everybody, regardless of their beliefs, I'm sure wants their family and friends to be healthy and safe. So these are just some things that I wanted to bring to everybody's attention. On a more positive note, sports, we're down to the last two teams for the NFL. If you recall my last few podcasts that started before the NFL playoffs, I predicted the two teams in the Super Bowl would be Philadelphia Eagles against the Kansas City Chiefs. And not to pat myself on the back, but it was probably one of the few times that I've picked both teams. I think the Kansas City Chiefs, a lot of people expected, but the Philadelphia Eagles were not the favorite to get to the Super Bowl. It should be a great game. The Kansas City Chiefs are going for an all-time record. If they win this game, they'll be the only three-time repeating champions of the Super Bowl in NFL history. And the Super Bowl has been going on now for about, I think this is the 59th year of the Super Bowl. The Philadelphia Eagles, that just so happened, played against the Chiefs 2 years ago in the Super Bowl and lost a very well-played game. This looks like it should be an outstanding game. We've got the brilliance of Patrick Mahomes, the quarterback who is just phenomenal, and all he does is win. And then he does that in conjunction with the head coach, Andy Reid, who seems to be the most adaptable coach in the NFL and is able to fully prepare his teams for any challenges. On the Philadelphia Eagles side, you may have the most balanced team in the NFL. You've got the record-breaking running back Saquon Barkley, who rushed for over 2,000 yards this year, had a superb performance in the championship game against the Washington Commanders. You've got a great offensive line. You've got an outstanding defense. And they've also got a very good quarterback in Jalen Hurts. So it looks to be like a great game. They take a week off between the championship games and the Super Bowl. So this game will be played a week from this Sunday, which I believe is February 9th. And as keeping in with tradition, I will give you my prediction on this game as well. I believe the Philadelphia Eagles will upset the Kansas City Chiefs in a close game. I really don't have a preference on who wins. I would just love to see an exciting game, and I'm highly expecting a great contest. Other than that, excuse me, the NBA Basketball League, we're getting ready for their All-Star game in about a week. And they've changed formats of that, so hopefully the All-Star game will be an improvement, because in previous years it's really been like pickup basketball where there's been no defense played and a lack of effort. So they're trying to make it a little different this year, changing it to 4 teams, and we'll see how that goes. Right now, it looks like at this mid-season point, if you had to pick a favorite, but it's still early in the year, would be the Oklahoma City Thunder. They're continuing to play outstanding basketball. But there's a few very good teams, so it should be interesting to watch. Otherwise, I'll conclude with real estate. Real estate, in spite of the things that I mentioned, is staying pretty consistent. The basic difference that I observe on the market is that homes of what I would call average components, in other words, they're just a typical home in a normal neighborhood. When they come on the market, if they're not priced properly, they're tending to sit. And in some cases, they're sitting a lot longer. The homes that are extremely nice in really desirable areas with lot views in the back, like water, woods, a golf course, and they have a lot of updates, those are continuing to sell at premium prices and selling pretty rapidly. If you'd like more information about real estate, or you would like to have a visit with me, or you want to pick my brain a little bit, I always welcome your inquiries. I can be reached at my email address, marty@floridasells.com, or my phone number, 407-595-9700. As always, we appreciate your comments and questions. Please let your friends and relatives and neighbors know about our show. We'd love, as always, to continue our listenership. And everybody stay safe and healthy. Marty Kaiser out. Oh, one other thing I forgot to mention. We will be taking a 1-week hiatus due to my producer and myself having different things going on next week that won't allow us to host the show next Friday. So our next podcast will be 2 weeks from today, as always, on Friday. Thanks very much and take care. Marty Kaiser out.